This is nothing there. This is George Gruhn. Here I am again on Friday, ready to tackle questions with what will hopefully be answers. But keep in mind, I'm not claiming to be omniscient. Every day that goes by, I try to learn more that's new. And I find out the older I get, the more there seems to be to learn. And sometimes learning requires having to change an opinion. So I welcome questions, but also I welcome responses from viewers, particularly if you disagree with a statement I have made, either as an opinion or if you feel that there are facts that I have missed. I look forward to intellectual debate. If I get into a debate with somebody and I win, I learn nothing new. If I get into an intellectual debate and I am proven wrong and have to change an opinion, I am ready to do that. Scientific method requires that. And if someone shows me wrong, I've learned something new for which I am thankful. So by all means, if you disagree, or if you have information that might contradict what I have said, I would very much like to hear from you. In addition, it's worth noting that I'm responding to written questions. And if you would like a one-on-one conversation for something more in-depth, I'm available by email, george@guitarist.com, or you can always call the shop number, 615-256-2033. I am here 6 days a week, and I am available to talk to people. So if you need a conversation, here I am, and that's the number. There are a few new things. Last year in September, I went on a 2-week trip to Italy with my daughter Amanda, who happens to live in Sydney. And I did drawing doodles, and they ended up now on our latest t-shirts. There be a t-shirt. That's Super Freddy. Freddy's logo, he's been with me since 1963. His baby pictures go back that far. But anyway, this is last year. Freddy and Super Freddy, and that's the back. And while they're rather bright colors and dance a bit, if you put them under black light, they have the added bonus that they just jump under black light, which I hadn't realized they would, but when we picked out the color scheme and they printed it, Greg was upstairs in the blacklight room looking at a guitar, because you can tell a lot under black light about guitars. Repairs and touch-up work is jumps under black light, things that may look perfect under normal lighting. Under black light, you can see various repairs and things that you didn't realize were there. But at any rate, when he was back there wearing one of the t-shirts, all of a sudden it lit up. So here's another of the designs. This is Freddy and Friends, and the same back. We have 4 different patterns, 3 that I drew on that trip to Italy last year, and 1 that I did back in 1978, but I had the picture and it thought it would make a great t-shirt. Another thing we have that's on our website, but I think is an interesting instrument. We have an interesting memorabilia piece right here. This is a 1939 Gibson Super 400 natural finish. 39 was the first year of issue for a natural finish Super 400. This guitar new was $410 in 1939. Now, to put that in context, a Martin D28 herringbone was $100 at that time, and a D45 Martin was $200. So this was a very, very expensive guitar in its day. This is one that we got from John Prine in a trade-in, December 28th of last year. He had written a letter stating that he got it from me around 1994, but there's publicity photos of him with this guitar, such as right here, dating. That's a picture done by Jim McGuire for an album that John did. That picture was done in 1985, which led me wondering, I didn't figure that out until after John had passed, but it's not right here. He must have had two of them. And the second one that he got in 94 from me was one that would have been similar, but this is an extremely rare model. The Gibson shipping records only show 17 shipped in 1939, and they didn't make anything that looked quite like this after about 41. So it seemed unlikely. At any rate, the guitar case had our old inventory number on a piece of masking tape on the case that was there from when he bought it. And we looked that one up, and it turned out he bought it in April of 1982, not 94. So when you get information from an owner as to when they got something, often enough, they don't remember. And John Prine was not known for being always accurate on remembering dates, but he did remember he got it from us. So this thing is now back with us, and it is offered on our website. There are a number of good PR shots taken with him with this guitar over the years. There's another one later than the first one I showed. There's yet another. And here is a photo of John with the guitar on the day that he traded it to me. He got 3 guitars from me, some very nice ones, including a good herringbone D28. He traded me several guitars, and he got several guitars on the 28th. Anyway, I shall plod into today's set of questions. Tom Griswold in Overland Park, Kansas. Can you comment on the design, merits, and potential future value of the discontinued Parker Fly solid body electric guitar? Parker is a very skilled craftsman who today is building some very avant-garde archtop guitars, which bring a lot of money. At least he gets, as of several years ago, he was getting about $30,000 for a guitar. But he designed the Parker Fly, which is a very futuristic looking guitar. And it's also a construction with composite of graphite and resin and wood in shapes that you could never do just in wood alone. Very lightweight. And he did this as a joint venture project with Fishman. And Fishman amplifiers and Fishman pickups are, of course, very well known in this industry. And so this was a venture between Fishman and Parker. And they set up a production facility. And it didn't turn out to be financially as successful as they had hoped, but they were very futuristic, very good guitars, including a model that had no magnetic pickup, but piezo pickup in the bridge. And it was basically an acoustic electric with a spruce body, spruce and composite, very featherweight. And I don't see very many of them now. And I have not seen them going rapidly escalating in value so far as what people would be willing to pay for them. But I don't see any reason why one couldn't bring $3,000. But still, I haven't seen a great deal of excitement from vintage instrument collectors on them. But it doesn't mean that they were not a brilliantly interesting design. They were. And what will happen in the future, well, I don't know. Because again, as Yogi Berra said, predictions are really hard because they're about the future. But I think that those instruments have genuine merit. And the spruce body fly in particular, I think is quite interesting. And I'm already seeing a comment that the Metropolitan Museum of Art has at least one Parker on display, and it deserves it. They are a very interesting artistic design, and they are a comfortable guitar to play. They are good instruments. So I would recommend for those interested in just seeing some interesting artistic designs, Google Parker Fly, and you will see some interesting concepts there. But as to what the collector's market is going to be in the future, I don't know. But as a piece of art design, they are quite special. So at any rate, I'll plod onward. Bill Hoff, what are your thoughts on refretting vintage guitars? And do new cones in a vintage National affect value? Well, first, we would not recommend refretting a pristine condition vintage guitar just because you like a different dimension fret. If it's pristine original, we'd leave it alone. However, if the frets are severely worn beyond what can be solved by a fret dressing, then we would, if we had it, refret it if we're offering it for sale, because without refretting, the instrument simply isn't functional. A bad refret job can certainly do tremendous damage. If you don't know how to get the old frets out without splintering the fingerboard, you shouldn't be touching it. A refret job should be done by somebody who's highly skilled, because it makes a huge difference. If you can do a refret that looks virtually factory perfect with no evidence that the frets have ever been out, then we feel that that is worth more money and certainly far greater utility than a guitar that's virtually unplayable. And keeping in mind also that worn out frets, or frets that have been dressed half a dozen times and no longer high enough to use, are not factory specs, so effectively they're not original anyway. How far do you have to go before something's no longer the original? Or is it like Abraham Lincoln's axe that's been handed down in my family for generation after generation, and we treasure it greatly? We'd never sell it, but we've used it over the years. We just had to use it, so as long as we used it, we had to change the head twice and the handle 3 times. At what point is it no longer original? Or Earl Scruggs' Banjo, that it was on at least its 6th neck by the time he died, and the tone ring was original, except that it was no longer gold plated, and the resonator was original, but it was refinished. The flange had been replaced, and the flange that was used as a replacement didn't quite match the dimensions of the wood rim, and rather than milling the flange to fit the wood rim, they cut down the original wood rim to fit the replacement flange, and the tailpiece was replaced, the tuners were replaced, the armrest was replaced, and the tension hoop was replaced. So what was left was the reworked rim and the original tone ring minus the gold plating, and the resonator refinished, and everything else was changed. So was it the banjo that he recorded Foggy Mountain Breakdown on? Well, how much can you change and it still be the one he had? It was the one he had when he died, but it wasn't the one he used on any of his classic recordings or in any major part of his career. Anyway, we do advocate doing repairs to bring instruments to playable original style specs, but you have to be very careful what you do and what you don't do. Like, you do not strip off original finish. There are numerous things that you just don't do, and bad quality repairs are tremendously damaging to value of instruments. We don't want to do any replacement hardware that does not exactly match the dimensions of the original, so that it could be, if you change a tuner, if you have an original Grover tuner of the exact same year, you can replace it, and as far as I'm concerned, it's fine. But if you modify and you put Grover automatics on an instrument that had open back earlier Grovers, and you drill out the holes in the peg head bit to be bigger, that is something that will greatly devalue a guitar, and we don't do that. So we don't want to hot rod instruments to be something that they were not before, but there are some examples where we still would do a change. For example, the old early Telecaster wiring system had a great lead position sound, but the rhythm position pickup had a capacitor that made it very muddy sounding. The Fender Broadcaster came out before Leo had introduced the precision bass, and he thought it would be a good idea to have a capacitor that would give it a very bass type sound, rather muddy, but still a very deep bassy sound, and you could play bass notes on it. Well, people don't use it for that, and most players consider that position to be virtually unusable on an early Tele, and they generally take that capacitor out and put it to a more modern Telecaster wiring scheme, although they leave the original pickups and they don't mess with anything else. And frankly, I can easily understand doing that if you want to actually use it. If you have one that's pristine, absolutely museum perfect, not a single scratch, you might want to leave it alone and not play it, because if you scratch it up at all, it's going to go greatly down in value. And we'd leave that original. But if one has wear, use, and we still want to keep it very much original, but that's an example. There are only a few such examples of things we would modify to make them more usable. But that would be one such example. Same person again, Mr. Bildhoff, do new cones in a vintage National affect the value? Well, the cones in the National guitars were spun aluminum, very thin and very fragile. And nobody ever really thought that those cones were necessarily going to last a lifetime. But the instrument National sold replacement cones because they were fragile. And they still today, National Resophonic, which is owned by different folks, it's a resurrected company, but they still produce cones that are very precise replicas of the originals. And if your original cones are crunched and no longer suitable for use and don't sound good anymore, it is certainly preferable to have new cones than to have original ones that are non-functional. You might not want to throw the old ones away, but as far as actually using the guitar, yeah, we put new cones in it. And the new cones sound great. And that's an example of something that's made today that's every bit as good, if not better, than the original component. And somebody who is only strictly for a museum, you may want to keep it original, whether the cones are functional or not, if it's just going to be to hang on the wall and display. But the new cones look like the old cones, and they sound like the old cones, and they function. So, and also you don't have to modify the instrument. You just unscrew the cover plate, plop the new cone in, and screw the cover plate back on. So you've not done anything irreversible. So we don't like to do irreversible changes that modify an instrument to something that it's not intended to be originally. Joel Feinberg says he was backstage at the Grand Ole Opry 4 years ago, and I had some instruments from a Hudson Valley, New York maker, and they were interested in it. That would be Joe Villette. Made some small body 12 strings that were tuned higher, tuned all the way up to D. another version turned up to B. We have them, and he's in Woodstock, New York. He's still very much in business, and there are dealers carrying them, so we're not the only dealer, but they are good, and we've sold them to quite a few professional players, and they're really fun instruments. Don Sarlin, I have a 1980 Tokai Cat's Eye CE 2500 0045 style guitar built for the Japan market. It was their top-of-the-line instrument, sold for 250,000 yen back then, a little less than a Martin 0028 at that time. I was given it as an endorsement then when I was a guitarist for Mary Travers, Peter, Paul, and Mary. I felt placing the guitars. I tried to give it to Paul Simon through Roger Sadowski, who did Paul's work. Roger said not to bother. He was repairing a D35 of mine at the time. At any rate, the guitar, he says, has German spruce top, East Indian rosewood back and side, ebony bridge and fingerboard, scallop decks, bracing, Goto, Cluson style tuners. And he says, to his knowledge, the only one that made it to the States was given to Artie Traum. And Steve Goodman and Roy Block got other models. Yes, I've seen them. They were not distributed in the US. They were distributed in Japan. And there were quite a few different model guitars from a variety of makers that were made for distribution in Japan rather than in the USA. Tokai also made the Gold Star Banjos, which were more accurate copies of a Gibson master tone, pre-war style, than Gibson was making at the time in the early 80s. In fact, they did that as a project between Tokai. They got together with Umeda Nakai Music of Osaka and Kawasagaki Music in Tokyo. And those folks had bought genuine old master tone banjos from me back in the 70s and early 80s. So they had things to look at. I was in Japan in 74 and even went to the Tokai factory, and the banjos they were making in 74 were not very good. But they were not that interested in my ideas at the time. But later when Japanese dealers came and showed them genuine pre-World War II master tones, they got interested, and that was the origin of the Gold Star. But they also did some extremely good copies of Stratocasters and Telecasters before Fender introduced the vintage reissues. Tokai was making some that were extraordinarily good and were very much modeled after the pre-CBS originals. So the Japanese were very much into guitar collecting early on, even as early as 1970. And they were making some instruments for the Japanese market that were very good quality, but expensive enough that American distributors weren't interested. In fact, when I was even in 74, Taka Nue, the export director for Morris Company, told me that they had offered Fender a prototype of a tele-type guitar that they said, you know, you could have these for the import model. And Fender said that you don't understand. The price you just offered us is more than it costs us to make an American-made tele. So at any rate, the Tokai cat's eye guitars are of good quality. Do I think they're as good as an old Martin? No. Were they pretty darn close to the quality of a new Martin in the 1970s? They actually were. They were quite good. But are they as good as the new Martins made right now? No, they're not. Martin's quality today is far, far better than it was in the 70s or even in the early 80s. It is quite a difference. So that's, anyway, that's a thought for there. Paul of Topeka, Kansas, do you still get as excited today when you hold a rare and very special vintage instrument in your hands as you did 50 years ago? The answer to that is yeah. I talked about this one here last week, 1924, Lore signed L5, my fourth guitar I ever owned. Looked just like this. I sold it back around 82 when I was financially in really bad straits. I've missed it ever since. Well, this one here looks just like the one I had then, but it sounds better. This particular guitar is more fun for me to play than any other guitar I've ever seen, that I've ever owned. I've owned thousands of guitars through the shop over the years, and I haven't seen any guitar that I've ever had, or any guitar that anybody else has ever had, that I ever had the opportunity to play, that I've enjoyed as much as this particular guitar. So this guitar here excites me, it inspires me, and I'm going to keep that. So that guitar is going to be with me as long as I am mentally competent and still alive. That guitar is going nowhere beyond me. But there's still plenty of guitars that I didn't own and couldn't even get, but I'd like to study, that I learned from them, and they can inspire me when I'm working to design new models, either with Martin or things like the new Gruhn model electrics that I've designed that have virtually everything I know about electric guitar design, all combined into one guitar that I'm very well pleased with. But the point is that, yes, I'm still inspired. And I have a good staff. I'm in 6 days a week. I don't have to be, but I like it here. And I'm going to keep right at it as long as I'm mentally and physically able to do it. And Scott Richardson was commenting that he had seen a Martin custom 14 fret dreadnought with sunburst finish and fancy ornamentation. And he's wondering if it's the same one that Vince Gill spoke of as a 28/45 model, and the answer is no, it's not the same. What Vince is talking about is we did a run, several runs actually, of quadruple O size guitars, 16 inches wide, that had Indian rosewood back and sides, Adirondack spruce top with herringbone trim, and style 45 snowflake inlay pattern on the neck. And they're plenty good guitars, and Vince does have one, and we sold a pretty fair number of them, and we very likely will reintroduce and do more of those. But right now we also have some 50th anniversary models for 50th anniversary of Gruhn guitars, and we're getting ready to do a release on those next week for some PR. I'll show them next week. But they feature sinker mahogany for the neck, back, sides, neck block, end block, interior linings, Adirondack spruce, and they have very deluxe inlay. They have style 45 snowflake fingerboard inlay on top trim, and the peg head has the early style Martin torch inlay, similar to what was on the OM 45, but also has the Martin logo similar to the decal logo, except done in abalone. So those are very deluxe instruments, and we will be able to talk more about them next week. Mitch Holder, back in the 60s, I obtained an early Fender Precision Telecaster type bass. The serial number was stamped on the bridge plate, and it was 0101. Could that have been the first one, or was 101 something else? Well, those bridge plates, as well as Fender neck casting plates, were stamped with serial numbers in batches and then used in virtually a random manner. And unlike the early Stratocaster, that before they had the number on the neck fastening plate in '54, they briefly had, only slightly more than 100 were made with the number stamped on the plastic tremolo cover plate. And those numbers started at 0, 1, 0, 0. We had that here, but those are very rare. To the best of our knowledge, that Strat was the first one shipped out. But again, even there, Fender serial number plates were not used in strictly consecutive order, although the very, very early ones in '54, the first ones, those plastic plates, they're more consecutive. And by the time they were doing metal neck fastening plates, no. So your bass is an extremely early one, no question about that. But we cannot show that it's the first or exactly in what order it's shipped, other than we know that that's one of the very first. Bob Van Putten did the Sonny Osborne RB Granada banjo pass through your shop in the 1970s? The answer to that is yes. I got that banjo. I really am a little foggy as to exactly when I got it. It was either 69 or 70. I may have gotten that even before we opened the doors to the shop. But I know who I got it from. I got it from a fellow named Maurice Mickey, who lived in Highland, Indiana. He played plectrum banjo. And when he got a 5-string, he'd always call me. I knew him from when I was still in college at the University of Chicago. So I would have first met him maybe around 1965. And I was already wheeling and dealing instruments, and he knew that if I had a plectrum, Bacon, banjo, or silver bell, and he had a Gibson, that I'd probably be real happy to trade him a nice fancy Bacon and Day that he liked for a Gibson. So if he got any interesting Gibsons, particularly if they were 5-string, he would immediately call me. So I suspect that he didn't have that banjo for very long at all, like maybe a day or two before he called me. And I remember even what I paid for it. I paid him $700 for it, which today the banjo would be darn near priceless. But I did eventually sell it, and it went through a number of, it went through me, and I think Tut Taylor had it briefly, and then he got it from me. And then Tut would have sold it to Tom McKinney in Asheville, North Carolina. And then it went from McKinney to Sonny Osborne. And Sonny Osborne still has it. So it is a very famous banjo. But that, I don't know where Maurice Mickey got it. I'm not sure he would have even told me. If they had any more stuff, he would have kept that to himself. But if they had much that was of any interest, he would have bought it all. Because he wasn't just buying a banjo for himself. It's just like if I find somebody who has a bunch of instruments for sale, and there's a bunch of them that are good, or at least any of them that are saleable, if I go there, I'm not going to just pick out one for me and leave. I'm going to buy every single one that's saleable. And if they're offered to me at a price where I can resell them, or if I want them personally, it's like the L5 I just showed, that one, when I said I'm going to keep, I didn't buy that at wholesale. I paid absolutely top dollar retail, which is what it took to get it. Because she came in saying it's not for sale. It's going to stay with my family. Well, but she's 85 years old. She has 5 kids, and you can't divide a guitar 5 ways. And she found out how much it was really worth and how much I was willing to pay. That could be subdivided 5 ways. But at any rate, that's the story on Sonny Osborne's banjo. Craig Langford, he'd like if I would speak about the 1986 Martin 0016K guitar. Says he owns 2 and is always looking for more. Martin made some style 16s in 00 and in D size in the mid-80s that are very different from their style 16s today. The modern style 16 is a so-called technology series with a It was originally a bolt-on neck for the technology series and a different bracing pattern. Now those technology series have a simple dovetail, but still not the compound dovetail that they use on their high-end guitars. But the style 16s of the mid-80s were very plain ornamentation, but they were good wood. They had the pre-World War II forward-shifted scallop bracing pattern. They had the traditional dovetail. And interestingly enough, the pre-World War II scalloped forward-shifted bracing pattern was something that Martin didn't offer on anything else at the time. The standard style 18 at that time had non-scalloped, fairly heavy rear-shifted bracing. And even the HD 28, which did have scallop bracing, didn't have the forward-shifted style. So the style 16 is a surprising freak anomaly in the way they did this, because it was one of their plainest looking guitars and priced very affordably, but they sounded great. If anything, they sounded better than a standard 0018 or a standard D18, and they offered them in a variety of wood: mahogany, koa, walnut, and ash. So those are good guitars. Cameron. We had discussed previously that he had a D28 Martin made in the early 60s with gold Grover tuners, and asked could they be original. And I had opined that it seemed unlikely to me that the tuners would be the exact same size as the standard nickel-plated tuners, and there was no model in the catalog that featured gold-plated tuners at that time. So I couldn't imagine why Martin would have a bunch of gold-plated tuners. I hadn't seen any before that had gold that I was convinced were original. But Greg Hutton up in Canada, who has a lot of the copies of the original ledgers, found a purchase at Martin at that time for 1,200 sets of gold-plated Grover Rotomatics. So apparently they had them, and it would appear that if somebody asked for them, that by golly, you could get them. Therefore, knowing that now, just like at the beginning, this session, I stated that I keep learning, and once in a while I learn something new. And occasionally, in order to learn that something new, I have to change an opinion. Therefore, it would appear that if the dealer said that they were that way new, very likely they were. So that is something new for me. Eddie Rice, when I worked at a music store in Birmingham in 1966, I played a Gibson B25. I believe I've put this guitar on your want list. Since Gibson guitars often have or had specific designation for their model letters, e.g. ES, L5, TG, etc. Did the B25 have any particular meaning? Also, same question about the LG models, although I realize that G stood for guitar. And how would you compare the B25 with the LG models? And in your opinion, depending on condition and other factors, is the B25 more desirable than the LG2, for example? Okay. First, ES at Gibson did stand for Electric Spanish, as opposed to Electric Hawaiian. L, we never have known what L stands for in the L5. There were a bunch of L models, arch top and flat top. For example, the early L1, L2, L3, L4 were all arch top. But later, in the early 30s, they had an L1 arch. First, there was an L1 arch top, and later there was an L1 flat top. And they have L00 flat top. So during the 30s, there was an L1 and an L2 and an L00 that were flat top models. But those were late 20s, early 30s for those. But we don't know what L means. We also don't know what B means. You mentioned TG. TG was tenor guitar. But what does LG mean? We don't know. I've been told by some folks it meant little guitar. I'm confident that's not what it meant. But we haven't found any records that indicated what it does mean. If somebody else can find an absolute record that's reliable on Gibson stationery or in a Gibson ledger book that explains what L means, I'd love to hear it. And the same for B, because the answer to that one is I don't know. And I've asked around and I haven't found anybody who really does claim to know what it means that can document it. The B25 model was introduced in 1962, and it basically replaced the LG2 model. In the 50s, there's an LG0, an LG1, and an LG2, and an LG3. The LG0 was all mahogany. It was their cheapest flat top student model guitar, and frankly, wasn't very good. And the LG1 and the LG2 looked exactly alike. They were 14 1/8 wide, so 14 1/8 inches wide. They had a spruce top, sunburst finish, and mahogany neckback and sides with walnut stained finish. The LG1 had ladder bracing, transverse bracing on the underside of the top. The LG2 had X bracing, and in my opinion, they sound much better. But looking at them from the front, they look exactly the same, except that through the sound hole, you can see that there's a center vertical strip of spruce for the center seam line in an LG2 and not on an LG1. And why they did that beats me. But that's one thing you can see without having to look at the bracing on the underside of the top. But otherwise, the LG1 and LG2 look identical. And the LG3 had triple binding on the top, where the LG1 and 2 had single binding. The LG3 was natural finish. Those LG2 and 3 models sound really good. And they do bring more money than a B25. The B25s have the adjustable height bridge saddle, which in my opinion is not a very good design, but LG2 and 3 from the 1950s or very, very early 60s are better guitars in my opinion, and they certainly do bring more money. Onward. Terry Dove, asking about Gibson Dove model guitars. The Dove was a dreadnought size guitar, and it was a top of the line Gibson dreadnought during the 1960s onward, and they feature maple back and sides, Sitka spruce top. They were offered in sunburst or natural finish for the top, typically a cherry red stain for the neck, back, and sides. Was introduced in 1962. The early ones have solid construction back and sides. The later ones, after by 66, are laminated, and they don't bring as much money. They are good instruments. They also feature the adjustable bridge saddle and a tune-o-matic type bridge saddle on the early ones. And that's not, in my opinion, as good as having a straight standard bone saddle, but it is what they had. And those early Dove models are certainly quite collectible. They're fancy looking. They have a pearl dove inlaid into the pick guard, and as well as engraving. So the hummingbird and the Dove had engraving on them, and A few in '63 on the hummingbirds were maple as well, but most of the hummingbirds are mahogany. At any rate, the Dove was the top of the line in Gibson dreadnoughts during the 1960s. But the J200 model, the Super Jumbo, was more expensive than a Dove. Still, there are a lot of people who like the Dove models, and they do sound pretty good, but in my opinion, I'd rather have one that was an earlier model guitar that didn't necessarily have the same ornamentation, but had the earlier style construction, lighter bracing, lighter weight overall, and a standard saddle rather than the Tune-o-matic. But people who go for Doves also like the bling. They are flashy stage guitars. So they definitely, at least for the early ones, are collectible, and they're definitely sought after. They look really good on stage if you like that kind of thing. I have two questions that are almost the same. John Chamberlain, could you please tell us what humidity level you maintain throughout your store to protect all those beautiful new and vintage guitars hanging on the walls? And that's followed by Mike Coffey. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, where humidity is a real problem. I have several guitars, both acoustic, semi-hollow, and solid body electric. Storing my guitars, half my guitars hang and half are encased. I'm concerned about humidity during the summer. Can you tell me the ideal humidity levels and temperatures for my music room? I am monitoring my room, and humidity runs between 49 to 60%, and the temperature runs from 70 to 77. Are these adequate settings? 60% humidity is getting high enough to be potentially problematic. We try to keep guitars in the winter no lower than 40, and preferably 45% or up to 50%, but we try not to go much above 50%. And we try to keep it pretty much that way summer and winter. In the summer, especially in places like Charleston, South Carolina, dehumidification may be a real issue. In the winter, any place where you have central heat, because it's cold, you have humidification as being of real importance. If you let the humidity go much below 40%, the guitars are likely to really have the wood contracting to the point it may crack, and instruments that are either too humid or too dry are likely to go out of adjustment and not play well or sound good. So those are serious considerations. And we generally recommend humidifying either the whole room or the house, and to have it set up automatic where it's connected to your plumbing, so that you don't have to be continually trying to refill, especially if you're leaving town for a week or something. If you have a humidifier that has to be filled twice a day, you can't go away for 2 weeks and just leave it and expect the humidity to be good. But if you have something built right into your home heat and air system, that is automatic, and you can set it where you want. And there are a number of companies such as Nortec that do some very fine humidification systems. But that's what we have here, and that's what we recommend. We have a question from Steve Shoby in Middletown, Connecticut. I understand that Sinker mahogany provides better tone due to its grain structure. Does being so old also give it an aged wood tone? Well, yes, Sinker mahogany is great stuff. And we do have some custom models that feature it on the neck block, end block, back sides, and linings. But it's good for a variety of reasons. One, it's mahogany, and mahogany is good. Two, it's virgin forest wood that grew in dim light very slowly. The trees could be well over 100 years old, some 500 years old. So at the time these trees were cut, they were big, they were old, it was dense, heavy, virgin forest type wood, and cubic weight per cubic volume. It weighs more than stuff that grows faster. Excuse me. And that makes a difference. And this is wood that was floated down the river to the sawmills, where they'd lose about 30% in transit. They didn't have sonar to find it or scuba gear to go after it, so it sat there for 100+ years. So if they were logging there from 1880 to 1920 in Belize, where this wood that we're using with Martin is from, that means the wood is from trees that were cut between 100 and 140 years ago. They were great trees then, and then the wood was naturally aged underwater. And it's not better because it was underwater, it's just better because it's great wood and it's aged. But it's great stuff. It still has to be dried and seasoned just enough to be sure it's dried and stabilized, but it doesn't take very long. Once it's dry, if you really have the right humidity, it's pretty well ready to use. Whereas if you take a freshly cut tree and you put it in the kiln and you get it to the right humidity, it's still very unstable. It's not ready to use. It's the kind of thing that will expand and contract with changes in humidity. It has quite a bit more seasoning and chemical changing to do before it's truly stabilized. Also comments, he has a 2002 Martin 0018 Kenny Sultan signature edition with Fiddleback mahogany back and sides, beautiful wood. How much of this wood is used for other guitars? I think the answer to how much of that wood is available for other guitars is, or how much is used, well, they use what's available. And when you have really highly figured, beautiful wood, lots of guitar makers want that. Also furniture makers and other artisans want it. So there are dealers who specialize in high-end lumber, not for construction lumber, but for specialty projects. And same supplier that supplies some of the finest highly figured wood to Martin also supplies high-end automobile makers. So, and also aircraft for private planes where they want to have gorgeous wood, where a billionaire owns a plane or it's a corporate jet and they don't, no expense spared. They want things that look spectacular. Well, they have beautiful wood paneling. It may be thin veneer, but it's gorgeous stuff. It can be very expensive. So the answer for how much of that type wood is used by companies like Martin, Gibson, etc., the answer probably is pretty much all they can find, and still at a price they can afford and still make it into a guitar. It's very desirable stuff, but does Fiddleback maple or mahogany, Fiddleback grain, does it make it sound notably better? The answer is no. It just looks really neat. So spruce, nice tight grain spruce is sought after because not only looks good, it really sounds good, but on Adirondack spruce, some great sounding instruments I've seen had wood that was not really all that attractive. But it does help to have pretty wood if you're selling it. And tight grain spruce does have a reputation for sounding good. It is good, but in Adirondack spruce, at least, some wide grain wood can sound really good. But looks help as well as sound in marketing a guitar. Stephen Couch in Houston, Texas. Do you foresee the COVID virus and economic effects having a material change on pricing of vintage guitars, particularly old Martins? Also, do I think vintage prices for Martins will hold up in the future given the lack of youth participation or care of acoustic instruments? Well, for right now, we are coping remarkably well at Gruhn Guitars with COVID crisis, but anybody who thinks that it's over and done with, or that everything is uphill from here, and that we're all going to be doing just great because it's all over, well, I think they'd be wrong. When the COVID crisis caused the mayor of Nashville to mandate that all non-essential businesses be closed to the public. I had fears that the 50th anniversary of Gruhn Guitars could be the last one. And for the first couple of weeks, it was rough. After that, our online business was picking up again quite well, to the point of being relatively normal. And these days now, we are open, but it's by appointment, or if somebody comes without an appointment, they can ring the bell and we can let 4 people at a time into the showroom. And we're doing quite well, but it's not like it was before. Business conditions are different, and Tennessee is now at the 7th worst in the USA for the escalation of number of cases reported per day, as well as death rate from COVID virus. So are we through this? No. Will we be through it before there is an effective and safe vaccine? I'd say there's a high probability that no, that we won't be through it till then, but it does look like vaccines are in progress right now. There's testing going on right now, and that is something really good to know. So at any rate, yes, we have confidence that Gruhn Guitars is going to survive, but a lot of businesses are not surviving in the music business and otherwise. Lots of clubs in Nashville or Austin, Texas are in deep, 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 deep trouble. So this is highly problematic. So where does it go for the future on that? I don't know. But have Martin guitar prices plummeted during the COVID crisis? No. Have Gibson or Fender electrics gone down in price since the COVID crisis? No, they have not. They have been holding their own remarkably well. And we hope that that will continue. I've spoken to a number of other dealers who say that their online business is doing quite well. And those who have been able to let some public in are doing all right with that as well. But again, here at Gruhn Guitars, when we meet the public, we have masks on, they have masks on. So I don't have a mask on for this presentation on camera, but I'm also the only one in the room. So we don't know where it's going. And again, I keep quoting Yogi Berra. Predictions are hard because they're about the future. Right now, we feel that the vintage market is holding up. There are concerns about the future in terms of the baby boomers are aging upward and are downsizing rather than collecting much more. I'm one of the few. It's one of the, just the beginning of baby boom. I was born August 21st of 45, and I'm still actively collecting. George Scanelli is looking at 2 Guild guitars, trying to figure out which he likes and which might be the better investment. One is a 1959 Gibson T100D Slim Jim, and the other is a 63 CE100D. Well, the fact is they're both good sounding guitars. They both have some collectible appeal, but they primarily sell on what they are as a guitar for utility use. And I would say if you can't afford to buy both, which if I find 2 that I like, I buy both. But A, that's because I can afford to do that. And B, I can afford to do that because I'm buying them mostly for resale. I don't keep very many. So I showed you one that I'm keeping, but that's about the only guitar I bought this year that I bought to keep. So I can afford to buy both, but both of these guitars, while they differ a bit from each other, are both stage worthy, really basically equal quality. But I would say probably the 59 Slim Jim would be a bit more collectible and a bit more valuable. And if I were to pick one, I guess I'd pick that one. J. Duggan. I acquired a Gibson Les Paul Standard in tobacco sunburst finish a couple of years ago. It plays and sounds great like a Les Paul should. The person I bought it from said it was a 1974. The serial number is 108, 475. It appears to be all original with patent sticker pickups and pot dates that preceded 1974. My question is, how could this be a 74? When I tried to look it up, I found that the Les Paul standard model was discontinued that year. Can you shed light on this? The answer to that is, yes, it is true that the Les Paul standard was not available in the catalog in 74. However, at that time, you could order a Les Paul Deluxe, which came standard with the mini humbuckers, but you could order it new with full-size humbuckers as a special order, and a fair number of people did. And if you did that, they had leftover truss rod covers that said standard, and Gibson put a standard truss rod cover on when they did that. So it wasn't in the catalog, but if you did that, exact as I said, just simply ordered a Les Paul Deluxe with full-size humbuckers, they would do it. And they'd put a standard truss rod cover on it. So now we have another one here, Len Kowalski in Winter Springs, Florida. Says, I have a 1959 ES330 TD with the unusual feature of having the inside area just at the F-hole opening painted red. This was done at the factory as the model number and factory work order number are stamped on top of the red paint. Have you seen this on other ES models, and might you offer an explanation as to why the red paint is there? And side note, I don't want to bias the answer, but a dealer from which I purchased this guitar and folklore I've seen on the internet suggests the red paint was used to de-emphasize the F-hole opening in black and white publicity photos. However, the 330 TD model dual pickup was not pictured in any of the early Gibson catalogs around the 59 release. The single pickup T model is pictured in those catalogs. Well, I can't recall ever seeing a catalog from 59. Sunburst Les Paul, for example, was introduced in mid-58. There's no catalog that showed it then. And I don't recall seeing a catalog prior to 60 that shows it. And so far as showing up in publicity photos, when they did publicity photos, they didn't normally take a photo that showed much of what you could see through the sound hole. So basically the answer to your question right now is I don't know. And I'm inviting listeners out there, if they have more information on this, by all means, send it to me, george@guitars.com. And anything we can find out about that, I will share the information. And again, if anybody wants to communicate direct with me, george@guitars.com, or the shop phone number, you can get me. Because I recognize that I'm not giving people a chance to talk back to me on these. If I did, we get maybe 3 questions an hour answered. In this way, we're covering multiples. Winston Hamilton, Fulbright, George, how important would you say is the aging, drying of wood before being used in production? I see many builders using interesting and exotic woods these days, but I often worry that these woods have not been fully dried out and they are not as stable. That is a valid concern. Just because wood has been kiln dried does not mean that it's ready for use. It takes years for wood to be truly stable. And the fact is that today, some makers are touting torrefied wood, oven baked at a high temperature, like 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and in an oxygen-free environment. That will stabilize the wood, but it also changes the harmonic response and the tone in ways that I personally am not fond of. Wood should be, at least for an acoustic guitar, stabilized for a while, at least a couple of years, before being used even after kiln drying. It doesn't necessarily have to be aged 50 years or even a decade if it's kiln dried, but it does take some time to be stabilized. And wood that has not been properly seasoned is an invitation for trouble. for Jose Benito Martinez Jr. Why doesn't Martin Gibson build regular production line guitars these days from Mexican woods like Cocobolo, Zircote, Granadillo, Bocati, whatever? Well, the public is very used to mahogany and rosewood. Some of these others, like Cocobolo, is a very good wood, but it also has a very oily resin in it that is difficult to season well, and is one that also many people are allergic to. So it's not a problem on a finished guitar that's lacquered. Excuse me. But Cocobolo is nasty stuff to work with, and if you don't have a mask on, it's pretty near like a spacesuit when you're grinding or cutting on it. You can have real problems. You wouldn't want to breathe that stuff in, and a lot of people have skin rashes from it when they're trying to work with it. Martin and Gibson at Fender like to get wood that they can use in quantity and that is readily available in quantity of good quality, rather than having just small batches. But again, more boutique builders are using quite a variety, and Martin has done a fair number of custom shop guitars with Cocobolo, but it's not one of their favorite woods to work with. Peter Richter, how do you think Kim Walker guitars and TJ Thompson guitars will be valued in the future? Kim Walker was my shop foreman back in the early to mid 80s. He was the shop foreman for Gruhn guitars, and he's an extremely skilled craftsperson, and his new guitars bring a great deal of money. And TJ Thompson never worked for me, but he is also noted as a very skilled craftsman. Both of these guys get a lot of money for their new guitars. And so are they sleepers that are likely to go up dramatically in value? It's not like finding something like a Andy Warhol picture when he was just starting out and you can buy for a few $100s and later is worth hundreds of thousands or more. Do I think that if you buy direct from Kim or TJ Thompson, that in the near future you'll be able to sell it for more? Probably not. But how is it going to be 20 years from now? Well, I don't know. But since Kim would be approximately close to my age, 20 years from now, very likely, he's not going to be building guitars. And TJ, I'm not sure exactly how old he is now, but I suspect again there that 20 years from now, you know, it's, I don't know. But I can say that both of these makers are very skilled and highly regarded. And I think that these are instruments, no doubt about it, they're fine. Richard Buse up in Pennsylvania says, having never played an original Gibson Advanced Jumbo from the mid-30s, can you comment on their build quality and sound quality? The modern reissues seem to rival Martin Rosewood D as far as sound. I've seen very few original examples for sale. Well, I have owned a fair number of original Advanced Jumbos, so I feel I can comment on their build quality and sound. The build quality on the Advanced Jumbo Gibson basically is standard Gibson production quality, which was very good, but not as neat and clean as work from Martin at that time. The materials are not the same. They both would have the Adirondack or red spruce tops, but the Martins from the 30s have Brazilian rosewood, and Gibson on the Advanced Jumbos and on the SK 200 Super Jumbo 200 pre-war was using Indian rosewood for the back and sides. But in my opinion, the Advanced Jumbo Gibson is the absolute best sounding flat top guitar that Gibson ever made. They're rare, but they play well and they sound extremely good. It's not exactly the same sound as a Martin, but if there ever was a Gibson that can compete well with a Martin Dreadnought, then this would be the one. And they are powerful. They have good tone, and the really good ones are inspirational instruments to play. So I would have to say that quality of sound is way up there. They're great guitars. Build quality is pretty much standard quality for Gibson at the time. Gibson's quality was good, but as far as absolute neat and clean interior work, especially, not as clean as Martin, but sometimes that doesn't make much difference in the sound so far as neat and clean. The design was good, the workmanship structurally was good, the materials were good, and as a result, they were very good guitars. John Gillikin, my wife bought me a 25th anniversary Gruhn 0018 Martin for our 25th anniversary. I have number 9 of 25. Were those guitars made for your shop or sold through Martin? The answer is they were made. We ordered them, and they were sold through Gruhn Guitars. Martin did not make them for anybody else. Martin custom order guitars of that type are made for whoever ordered them. Dennis Banks, what are your thoughts about pre-war D28/45 conversion value? Well, I can't imagine anybody wanting to take a pre-World War II D28 and converting it into a style 45. That would reduce its value. It's already something that a clean 1937 D28 herringbone would easily bring $100,000, and you wouldn't want to take that and convert it. Now, would you perhaps take a 1960s Brazilian rosewood guitar and make a conversion where you spiffed it up and had a really skilled craftsperson doll it up to look like a 28 or like a 45, take a 28 and make it look like a 45? Yeah, that people have done that. It depends on how good the craftsperson is. But if it's done really, really well, you could actually take a 1960s D28 and do a really good conversion job and make it into a style 45. And it would bring more than it did originally. But most conversions, if it has real collectible appeal, you wouldn't want to ever take a real, true, great collectible and do a conversion of that kind. Now, Martin has also done some of those, and particularly if they can find one that somebody wants to sell that has fine condition back and sides of Brazilian rosewood, but the neck is broken and the top has been collapsed or cracked up or smashed. They've done some of those at the factory with Adirondack spruce and even re-necked. In fact, one of the guitars that John Prine got from me in late December, used on his last show at the Grand Ole Opry House, was a 1960s Brazilian rosewood D35 that he loved it. It had beautiful, very, very deluxe ornamentation, more fancy than a style 45, tree of life, vine inlay, etc. And that was a Martin conversion. It was sure enough worth more than a D35. You know, one other question here, Richard Holler, what are the guitars that Ranger Doug, Riders in the Sky often play? Seems the name begins with S, letter S. That's Stromberg. And Stromberg was in Boston. They made some of the absolute finest orchestral rhythm F-hole archtop guitars ever made by anybody. Oh, I'd still rather have my L5 that I showed you earlier, but the Stromberg, Freddie Green with Count Basie used one. It was 19 inches wide. You could cut through a full brass band orchestra for rhythm acoustically with no pickup. And that is what Ranger Doug uses. He has several of them, and that's a good thing. And I'll end with a question from David, looks like Brock B-R-O-C-E, Rocky. Sadly, have you seen an influx of guitars coming in due to coronavirus? Answer, so far, no. Although I have had one musician who consigned 3 instruments to me because his income was cut off. But have I received any instruments because someone died of corona? No. Have I had an influx of people who are plumb out of luck and selling because of corona, having cut their income? Not yet. And I hope never, because while I'd like to be able to buy guitars at bargain prices so I could resell them profitably, I don't wish to profit off of someone else's misfortune. And so I'm pleased to say, so far, no, we've not gotten an influx of guitars because of the coronavirus. And I hope we never do. And look forward to hearing from more folks next week. And again, if I haven't covered something in the depth that you'd like, or if you disagree, please contact me. I learn far more from people who point out any error I make, any disagreement. Call me or email me. You got my phone number and you got my email address. Use it. Until next week, have a good one.